This is Matt over here. I work closely with Matt on a couple of things. So you might know him. He works for some very large companies and does a lot of work in the CEP area and knows Byron Sharp pretty well, don't you, Matt?
I see him walking around sometimes. I also live in the same area he does.
So some of you will know EBI and Byron Sharp pretty well. So Matt, you've done that and worked with that company pretty closely on some clients, which we can't talk about. But anyway, or can you talk about it?
No.
No. Okay, cool. There's the thing about effectiveness is like no one can talk about anything that actually worked. Okay, anyway, I'm just going to get started. Thanks everyone for coming. I'm going to give you part one of, as you can see, a extremely long slide deck, which is what, 160 slides. We don't have enough time for that, but let me just start with the basic stuff and then we'll go from there. Okay, now there's a very unpopular topic as evidenced by this cartoon that makes me crack up every single time because it's very, very true. Why do marketers avoid this topic in particular? It's very interesting, basically because it screams accountability, and it's more fun to spend lots of somebody else's money on fun things that make us look good and are novel and interesting than it is on pushing the company's fundamentals forward, which is a lot harder. So by virtue, a lot of marketers will shy away from this. So thank you for coming. And that means you have a higher maturity level than most. So that's really nice. And look, I noticed a bit of a gap in discourse when it comes to this topic. A lot of people just talk about metrics. There's some very famous people who are known for this. And I just found that they didn't address some of the massive issues that affect this topic. So I found that a bit strange. So let's plug some of those gaps today really quickly. I come from three sort of different backgrounds, which is kind of why I can talk about this in a less biased way. I started in traditional advertising agencies, large agencies, global ones, which are now sort of dying. And this is before sort of digital was coming into the scene and very big. Then I worked with a lot of digital agencies, started my own, started creating custom software, that kind of thing, and then got into the sort of SaaS growth marketing where I moved to San Francisco and worked as a growth manager for a very large startup. So I kind of have a more balanced view between these channels, things that work, things that don't work, without that sort of baggage from any one of those three industries. Today will be platitude free, and some of these opinions may offend you. So if they do, I apologize, but there's a learning experience, so just run with it. I mean, you can tell me I'm wrong, I don't mind, okay? Who is Matt? Matt's over here. He's just going to help co-host today. Matt, just 2 seconds of a quick MO.
Yeah, I'm only going to chime in when it's useful, but I've been doing marketing for a very long time. I was doing marketing effectiveness for when the term was just coming up, and I helped John put this together. It's going to be great to talk through and add anecdotes where it makes sense, but John's going to be running everything here.
So marketing effectiveness, it's one massive rabbit hole, which is basically why I avoid talking about this subject. And it's a rabbit hole that actually consists of two other rabbit holes. First of all, like marketing, what is it? Spoiler alert, it's very, very different at every single company around the world. Everyone thinks it's the same, but it's not. And the other one is measurement. Measurement's another massive rabbit hole, especially in anything political, because measurement and politics do not mix, especially objective measurement anyway. So for that reason, it's like highly political as well at the same time. And that is the topic that a lot of people do not talk about at all, which is why we need to address it today. Before we get there, though, you'll probably have two mindsets or frames of reference when we're attacking the subject. One is if you work in marketing, you think what you do is effective and other people just don't understand it. That is the narrative that a lot of famous marketing commentators like to spread because it's very popular. The other frame of reference is maybe it isn't effective what you're doing, and perhaps you just don't understand it. These are the two extremes. Most people are somewhere in the middle. But I think it's very interesting to see which one you'll bring today to what I have to say. What's really interesting, though, is that there is a massive halo effect over this whole topic, right? One thing I notice is that when things are really going well in the company, there's this halo effect, and nobody talks about marketing effectiveness. They don't care. There's no pressure on the marketing department. But when things aren't going well, suddenly marketing effectiveness is like you're being pressured to, measure this or measure that and justify X, Y, Z. So that is the sort of pressure cooker halo effect that I think is very true, and which I noticed in agency days when I was doing basically exactly the same thing for two different competitors. One was doing well, didn't want to talk to me, didn't care, just keep paying invoices. The other one was on my back all the time going, what's this? Where's this money being spent? Why is that not effective? Blah, 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 blah. Exactly the same playbook. So I found that just a really interesting split test. You may have come across this or felt that same dynamic before. And I think it's interesting, doesn't get talked about. Why do so many CEOs have like zero faith in their marketing team. Look, this was a slide taken from Koen Pauls. I'm not sure if you know him. He's a Belgium, actually no, he works in LA now, a very famous academic, but does practical work as well. So this is a long time ago, and I don't think it's gotten any better. Basically, executives think you live in a bubble. And yeah, I think it's a lot of the times true. Now, what do I do? There's three sort of main, I would say, groups of people involved in the marketing function. You've got people you report to as an internal marketing team. Generally, it's like a non-marketing exec, like a CEO or CFO. Then there's your internal team, whatever. And then there's external vendors that you use to execute all this kind of thing. I just help bridge gaps between all those and make sure that they're all talking to each other in a similar language. And basically, I'm a glorified translator. Let's just go through an example of like how marketing becomes ineffective. And the marketers generally get influenced by people like this, award shows and books that are very popular, and that flavors their sort of perspective and understanding on things. Now, at a worst case scenario, this is how marketing is ineffective. You have an agency vendor that you contract to do lots of things. They give you, hey, things are really good, we've got lots of volumetric or whatever, because they're being paid to make things look good for you and not tell you what's going on. What's happening under the scenes, though, is that they're outsourcing most of their function to another company who runs all the operations, which in turn outsources again to some freelancer, generally in Bangladesh, Philippines, or India, who actually does the technical shipping of your campaigns. And then the way that works is they go, hey, I've done all this work that you're talking about. The next company that sort of handles the operations goes, here's access to, the platform reporting that we've set up for you as an agency. The agency then reports back to you. Then that's taken as the head of marketing going, hey, we've done lots of good stuff, digital transformation, buzzword, brand refresh, we won some awards or whatever. And then the CEO goes, yeah, you're fired. The fundamentals of the business did not increase. So again, this is worst case scenario when it comes to marketing effectiveness. You may have seen examples of this before. Hopefully that doesn't happen to you. But I think in modern times, the function has really become a scapegoat for company underperformance. It's the easiest target. Sometimes these departments are hired with people who are not politically savvy purposely so that you can be hung out to dry when things don't go very well. In turn, sometimes the sales and marketing department uses another scapegoat to deflect, which is, a network of vendors, which is why agencies are hired often. And then the agency in turn tries to deflect saying, hey, well, it's because you're a small brand or because of macroeconomic conditions, both of which can be very, very true. But yeah, that's kind of like what I call the sort of cascading scapegoat that can really affect things. I'm going to give you the answer to marketing effectiveness right now, and that is, it really depends, which I know is probably a very unsatisfactory answer, but I think maybe early in your career, you go, hey, it's a very simple measure, mental availability or physical availability or this metric or that metric. And then you realize that every sort of metric can be gamed, and there's a whole layer of politics that goes on underneath that you become slowly aware of, and then it becomes it depends, and then you probably get to the later stage of your career like me, where I go, well, actually, it depends is not a good answer, and it's not very sellable, so you end up just giving them a simple answer to a very complex question, but it is a very complex area.
I think about that time in How I Met Your Mother, where they talk about the glass shattering moment that everyone has. I was that LinkedIn post that went a little bit viral last week, where somebody had an accidental 1x1 pixel of nothing that was responsible for most of the leads that came in through Facebook.
Oh, yeah, it was a meta
glass shattering moment.
Yeah, it was like so he made an accident. He had all these ads being split tested for conversions, right? And like one of them was accidentally created. It was just a blue picture, like a 1x1 blue picture with the same copy and everything, and it actually ended up outperforming everything else by like a factor of, I don't know, 10 or something. Yeah, so
what are those glass shattering moments where you're like, maybe I truly don't understand how advertising works as well as I think I did, because an ad that's not supposed to work worked.
Yeah, it's very interesting. We never split test against just like nothing, like for example, logo on a black background. I've always wanted to do that split test and just see which one's more effective, because so much energy.
Good paper on that. It's called Ghost Ads, and Google did it back in the day. It's very it's a difficult test that most vendors won't approve, but Ghost Ads, they split test an ad that has nothing on it
as a control, right? Yeah, because we never have a control. Interesting. And what happened?
The Ghost Ad stole credit where it wasn't supposed to steal credit.
I'm not surprised. Okay, so let's just get stuck in right now. But when people talk about marketing effectiveness, like of what marketing, I think never gets defined. very different companies. Are you talking about advertising or other non-advertising parts of marketing? Very ill-defined. And then effectiveness for whom exactly? I think this is really key, because one measure that makes one person look good, someone else doesn't care about. And then over what time scale never gets defined either. It's just long or short, which I found very strange. And then by which metric exactly? I think this is where most people sort of really want my opinion on things. There's hundreds, thousands of metrics we could look at. But then how do you measure that metric is even more critical, I find, because if you take shortcuts or measure it inaccurately, it doesn't really matter. So let's go through some of these today. Rich Smirnov, I had on the show ages ago. He's a product manager, and he says it's very interesting. We go to all these meetings every day, yet we never sort of stop to pause and go, hey, what actually is this meeting about before we go to it? Is this just like a whip, or is it like, does someone have a bigger agenda around this? You just get pulled into things without thinking about it, is the key point that he makes. So if you want to protect your time, like, have a think about that first. And I think I would say the same thing about marketing. Before you do it, let's just first figure out what it is exactly. And that is a big problem. Now, there's this really famous poet and philosopher called Steven Seagal. I'm not sure if you know him. And he's very famous in this movie for saying assumptions are the mother of all fuck-ups. And I think that's very, very true. And it just made me think, hey, are we all assuming that we're aligned on what marketing even is in the first place before we even talk about anything else? And I thought, okay, well, what is it? Is it this? Is it this, 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 this? Can be many different things depending on your perspective. It's a very large discipline. We call this semantic shift as well. The words that we use kind of change in their meaning over time. I think this is very much the case with this word. Maybe back in the 50s, it was more 4 Ps. Then broadcast sort of became really, really big and became very much Mad Men advertising era up until like the 80s or 90s. And then it came into digital era and was rebranded growth or revenue ops or whatever you want to call it these days. And then Matt, you said it's probably called this now, agentic powered, omni-channel, data-driven, one-to-one full stack, brain rot, sort of AI slop. We see a lot of people going, marketing is dead, AI has killed it. Here's some automated video generation, TikTok-y kind of thing for brain rot slop posting. And here's an example of that. I'm sure you've seen posts like this on LinkedIn, which crack me up every single time. Someone saying marketing is dead and then just talking about social media advertising or content production, which is generally some kind of like automatic video production that gets watched by bots, basically. And interesting, tell me the story about this company here, Matt.
Yeah, it's a firm that is VC backed, so it's something that YC Combinator or they're like invested in, and they allow hundreds of thousands of mobile phones to do marketing for you. So they, how email is warmed up over time. They do that with TikTok accounts to warm up a TikTok account and then post out thousands of times per day, so that you can get basically organic reach, but across a lot of different accounts. You're paying to be you're paying slop, basically.
Yeah, and this is and then they post a picture of the phone farm that they're using to give fake views.
They were proud of their phone servers. Like I showed this to John the other day, and he said, "Oh, that's just the server rack." And I said, "No, they are phones."
Yeah. If you zoom in there, you can see the phones. I've seen, if you follow Augustine through, you probably see pictures of these like phone farms, which are basically responsible for a lot of views on social media. And yeah, look, a lot of people optimizing towards that goal, which I found kind of weird. But anyway, so I have this hypothesis, and this is like last year. This discipline has gone so complex and dynamic over time that do people actually know what it is? And I just noticed there was so much variation between the hundreds of clients that I've dealt with over the years. Like, they all interpret it very, very differently. And in modern times, I found it's become super box-holed into more of a comms role. So that was my hypothesis, but hey, trust my opinion or not, it doesn't really matter. I wanted to get some research data to figure out if that was correct or not. And I did that study. So I sort of compared 3 groups, marketing or heads of marketing, non-marketing execs, so CFOs, CEOs, and then a control group, so a sample of the population that may or may not work in business. What was very interesting about that is I asked them some very, very basic questions. You can see the results here. I won't bore you with them all, but I basically went and had verbatim conversations. So it was a one-to-one interview. There's no AI or panel surveys that may or may not have unhuman sort of responses. I actually had a phone call. They were not allowed to Google or anything or look at the screen when they were answering these questions. So these are all off the cuff answers, which I transcribed verbatim and then synthesized into answers to the question, what is marketing? There's other ones, what is effectiveness, what is brand? Very interesting answers too, which I'll come to in a second. But this is the first answer to this question, okay? What is marketing? This is probably a bit hard to see, but basically we sort of grouped the responses into like 5 kind of macro categories, which all splintered off into like multiple things. So we had anything from brand and perception, communication, messaging, strategy planning, growth and sales, and customer understanding. So, quite diverse and doesn't really answer it. So lots of things similar to the American Marketing Association's definition here, which is just, I don't know, I could not say that or repeat that in an elevator. And if I said it to a friend, they'd be like, I still don't understand what you do. So while they're trying to get really technically correct here by peer reviewing this periodically with 5 practicing academics, apparently.
Is it?
That is the current definition. That is reviewed and updated quite regularly.
Yeah. You can't repeat that in an elevator, like you said. I'm not sure what that means.
Yeah, exactly.
My dad often like laughs at me with his friends because he says, "What are you doing now?" And I say, I work in marketing." And Dad's like, I don't even know what he does. And
Yeah.
if I said that definition, that does not help.
No. My parents thought I worked at Google for a long period of time because I was doing a lot of stuff in the digital scene, and I'm like, no, I don't work at Google. Or like, oh, he creates websites. I'm like, no. So yeah, there's another definition that I really like that Kuhn Poles put me onto, which is this one. It's about being a growth, sort of creating this equilibrium in markets. So basically, that means net growth relative to all your other companies or competitors in the market. And basically, if you aren't making a change by default, your company is going to stay exactly where it is or slightly regress. So just to keep it there requires a bit of effort often because markets are sort of, competitive pressures are coming in. But if you're going above and beyond that benchmark point, then your kind of marketers are effective of doing their job in this terms. Now, I kind of agree with that, but also disagree because in modern times it's not really that, and as evidenced by this next slide, growth is extremely rare. So this combines Kantar's study that they did, which is brand tracking. It was over like 1,000 or 2,000 brands over a long period of time, looking at brand penetration. And then Kuhn Poles' study did the same thing. This is an average of the 2 studies, but they came to very similar sort of ratios here. I think one of them was even a bit higher than this, so lower growth. But basically, 85% of the time, if you work in marketing, you are not growing the brand. Even if you think you are and you're spending lots of money on it, net, the brand is just bubbling along in line with everybody else and with inflation, GDP, and whatever else. What that means is that growth is rare, but it's also very tiny. So a very interesting EBI study did here. Again, this is a bit more FMCG or CPG based. So these competitors and these markets tend to be quite competitive, you would say. And, if you're getting small amounts of growth, you're doing a good job. But what this shows is that if you are growing at more than 1%, you are in the 96th percentile. So 96% of the time, basically, your company is growing under 1% or declining. So that means that marketing is kind of set up for almost failure when it comes to effectiveness. And growth is extremely political. So if your boss comes to you and goes, hey, we need to increase penetration by like 10% year over year or something, or market share by 20%, based on those stats, you basically tell him he's dreaming because that's not going to happen. That person's probably coming with targets from investors or the board, and they're coming to you going, hey, you need to increase this. So I would really recommend to be realistic about that because basically they're setting you up for failure as a scapegoat. I'm not sure if you've been in that position before, but I have, and it's always very interesting.
One of those situations where a lot of marketing is used to stay in the same place, which is a good thing, but it's very hard to communicate that. And then the larger you are, the decline that it happens over years instead of 1 year over time. If everything else stays the same. I was in insurance for years. That category doesn't move unless someone really screws up. I think all the gains that Telstra is making over the last few years is likely because Telstra does good advertising, yes, but they also are not Optus at the moment. Optus in Australia is a company that is the second largest, and they keep screwing up year over year, and people, it's an obvious thing to swap. So If you can, use marketing to stand still, great, and watch everybody else fall over. Adobe's another good example of that, actually.
What? Yeah, are they growing or they're falling
No,
over?
they're declining like mad because they aren't adapting to how everybody else is adapting in the market.
Yeah.
And they're using a lot of policies. If you buy 1 month, you're actually buying 12 months. If you cancel, you have to pay for the extra 8 months that were left over. And
Oh,
so
and
a lot of people are doing alternatives.
they had that
Um,
forced privacy thing going. Hey, if you continue to use Adobe as well, we're going to use all your data. Like this is an enterprise company as well for AI optimization as well. I remember that going
but
through. And it's
funny
like,
on that,
wow, how to lose
that's
customers.
been there for years. Only, but people only just noticed it. It's been there since like
Wow.
2018 or something.
Wow.
But Adobe have been declining for a lot of reasons, and marketing couldn't do anything about that to change
Yeah.
that. It's an internal force that made that happen.
Yeah, I'm sure the CMO is under pressure anyway, so they'll probably churn through a couple more. So yeah, anyway, look, this is super political. If we've ever been in a sort of head marketing position, you just know how political it actually is. It's not about like company performance a lot of the time. So here's some hard logic based on that data, right? Is that most firms don't grow, especially not via marketing. Therefore, likely you've never experienced marketing that has been effective or resulting in growth, which is a hard pill to swallow. And the majority, what they think about marketing effectiveness is likely wrong in that case. And therefore, the kind of marketing that actually results in growth will appear very unorthodox to you because you've never experienced it or seen it or no one's talked about it. And also, current marketing dogma is wrong if you're viewing this through a growth lens. So what is effectiveness? Very interesting. No one really defines this either, but basically achieving a desired result. Key thing being, what result? Everyone has different metrics and results that they want to achieve. So it's very hard to give a firm answer on that. Here's an example. If I was a digital marketer, I might be focusing on things like visit sessions, conversions, engagement. You probably heard these terms before. That's kind of the lens that I view effectiveness through if I'm doing my job correctly. As a brand marketer, I might be looking at very different things like awareness, consideration, identifiability, reach, and things like that. As a B2B person, I'll be focused on leads, on SQLs, MQLs, all that kind of thing. Maybe customer acquisition if I'm doing my job really correctly. So very different desired results, I think, is the point. And that's why I really like what Colin says here is that marketing is more about being a change maker and bringing the company from here to here. It's not about these specific metrics. It's just about being an agent for change, positive change, hopefully. And I think it's a very mature way of thinking about what marketing actually is. So coming back to the second question that I asked is, what is marketing effectiveness? Very, very varied results that I probably can't even give you a very firm sort of any one answer on it. But what I did test was how many years they'd been in the industry, because I just wanted to see if that flavored the maturity of the answer to this question. So you can see here, this is like a bar graph of the respondents and how many years experience they had from 0 to 40 years. A lot of people had quite a lot of experience though. So that was the average line there. It's just over 10 years. So if I had to put their answers into kind of a couple of buckets to show you your thinking process as you progress in your career, when you had less experience as a marketer, it was very much a very simple answer. It was a channel comms focus of marketing. It was very sort of task orientated. I do X, Y, Z, and it produces this result, and that's the metric that I use for measurement. Very much sort of marketing attribution, measurement maturity as well. Now, after about 5 to sort of 10 years, were very interesting when I asked this question, these basic questions, I go, why is it so hard to answer? Because there's so much complexity that there had been exposed to that they couldn't really answer these basic questions very well. And they had a very multi-component view of marketing, like it's a bit of this, a bit of that, a bit of that, a bit of that. It wasn't a simple answer. And they were using a bit more of a blended approach. So, maybe brand tracking over here, attribution here, maybe an MMM or some sort of model or reporting dashboard sort of over there, and blending these things together. So again, a bit more complex answer to simple questions. And then there was this weird threshold cusp once they got to about 10 years experience, maybe a bit more, where they not become jaded, but just became very much aware that, marketing really isn't about pushing the company forward. It's more of a vision and alignment role that the senior marketer would play. and that it was a bit more about pandering to the ego and status of people within the organization internally than it was about anything else. And, they're very aware of that. There's a stakeholder groups like partners, investors, board, executives, internal staff in terms of internal marketing, and then of course customers, which is what most people sort of talk about by default. So and for that reason, they're very complex reporting and measurement. So hopefully that gives you a bit of a curve just to see where are you on that journey, because it's really going to flavor how you think and talk about effectiveness. I think the biggest assumption here is that effectiveness is all about customer effect, but actually these are the amount of stakeholders you probably have in marketing. And I think if you ignore these, that's kind of when you see you could produce really good results for customers, but probably get fired because you're not appeasing some of the internal stakeholders. So this is how many stakeholders you kind of have to pander to with your marketing efforts, which is a lot bigger list than maybe most people think. So it becomes very complex to go, hey, effective for whom, right? Like, which one of these am I optimizing towards? That's why it's really hard to answer the for whom sort of question. And as we know, if down the bottom left, these are my two favorite groups, is that you could do a really effective campaign for everyone else. And then if the CEO's niece or nephew doesn't like it, or wife or something thinks it's a bad ad, you'll be under pressure. And then the other hidden group, right, is secret advisors and consultants that you don't even know exist, that are advising the senior executives, independently measuring things and giving their 2 cents. These will not be visible anywhere else. You won't even know they exist. And yet they'll have heavy influence over the pressure that you put on there as well. Like, actually, that is one of my roles. So I know that to be true. So again, I think the key point here is that there's this famous analogy where these blind people are touching an elephant, right? So in this case, the elephant is marketing effectiveness, but it could be anything, right? If you're blindfolded and you're touching the tail of the elephant, you could say, hey, this is a giraffe. If you're touching the leg, you could say, oh, this is a rhinoceros. Or if you're touching the trunk, you could say, hey, this is a snake. And I think that just it's analogy saying that it really depends like which view that you're taking as to what marketing effectiveness actually is. So, is it sales? Is it leads? Is it conversions? Is it engagement? It could be lots of things. So the first thing to do is to get aligned on how you see effectiveness before you start optimizing for it and making assumptions. Colin Lewis, during a conversation I had, makes a really key point here, is that I know some very, very famous, well-to-do CMOs that are always winning awards and everything, who are just effective marketers. They're very good at politics. They're very good at pandering to the right egos. This is a skill. This is a really, really good skill to have, especially in corporate and larger companies. It's a dog-eat-dog world out there. So it's all about making yourself look good, making the company look good, and other people look good. Underneath, they can be terrible, at driving marketing effectiveness and results for the company, but they stay in their position and their career blossoms. So I think the point here is that there's a huge difference between the two. Maybe there's a bit of crossover, but they're almost mutually exclusive. So just be very aware of that. You can be very good at what you do and have a really good career without actually affecting anything bottom line for the company. So just to finish off as well, before we sort of go to Q&A, I'm not here to change your belief systems. If you've read Daniel Kahneman, he basically says that's impossible. So whatever opinion you have, I'm not going to change that. But yeah, hopefully some of that has opened your eyes to some of the things that I have experienced over the years. Matt, anything you want to add to that? Anything incorrect?
No, I agree with everything that's happened. I think it's very interesting on that last slide with the marketing effectiveness and effective marketer. Some of the best marketing people I've worked for have been they've been excellent at the internal marketing, and they've had such you can have a really good effective marketing campaign, but if you're not marketing to the stakeholders internally, it can go really wrong for you, and people can backstab you. I've seen it so many times, and it's such an important point that there's that hidden stakeholder that you're talking to is very true.
A really good example of this. I did a campaign for a client, got really good technical results, but I excluded the IP address of all their office, right, from the marketing campaigns. In this case, it was like very heavy digital campaign. So what you do when you exclude the IP range is that none of the employees or internal stakeholders see the ads. So, at the end of the campaign, things went really well. I'm like, hey, here's the customers acquired as a direct result of XYZ, blah, 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 blah. Sales are up by X, blah, blah, great result. And then the feedback from the head of marketing was, oh, Yeah, but the two CEOs, so the MD and the CEO, really, they're not happy with this. They haven't seen the ads going around or whatever. Did you do anything? And I'm like, what do you mean? And it's because they hadn't seen the ad. So like, never never do that. That's why retargeting is so important, even though it really doesn't drive much, is that at least the internal employees go, hey, we're everywhere. We're doing something. I can see our ad here. I can see our ad there. It's basically the digital version of the oldest trick in the book, which is putting billboards, so outdoor advertising on the driving path of your senior executives to the office. So wherever they drive to work, make sure you buy out all those media, so it looks like you're everywhere when you're not, because that just puts a lot of pressure off your back. There are other forms that take that as well, but if you're experienced, you'll know that is a really essential media buy, even though it doesn't really affect the customer effectiveness.
Very important proportion of the budget.
Yes. So hopefully we have now covered what is effectiveness for whom, right? Which I think is really, really, really important. Now, the next thing I want to go through, but I'm just conscious of time here because I need to go to work and it's 35 minutes. What I want to cover in part 2, 3, which is probably the juicy thing that you all want to hear, is like the time horizon, which is important when it comes to measurement. And then which metrics we're going to look at. There's a bundle of them, but there's some sort of better ones and worse ones. But then also critically, how you measure them. A lot of the time, this is outsourced to agencies who then outsource it to a measurement agency or research agency. And then there needs to be integrity between the fidelity of that data that's coming back to you. And often the incentive structures mean that they want to make you look good rather than give you an accurate idea of how things are actually going. So I think how you measure it is almost more important than which metrics you're measuring as well. So that's what we're going to cover in the next couple of slides. And we're going to touch on sort of what brand is as well, because often that's the scapegoat that marketers use as well. So join me for part 2, 3. But before you do, any specific questions I can answer? I've got about 10 minutes-ish or a bit longer before I go to a meeting.
I think that what and who is super important and undervalued, because I think a lot of, if we're talking about what other marketing effectiveness does, it's they jump straight into the slides. They jump straight into the 60-40 graph. They jump straight into the 95-5 principle. 95. And you don't take a step back and go, is this important for me? Is this important for what my company is or who I'm pandering to? The 60-40 rule has a lot of issues with it, and it doesn't apply to majority of brands, but it's the first thing that people throw when they go, what is marketing effectiveness? Well, it's a balancing of budget, but it's that what and who is really important setup.
It's a complex area, so I'm no surprise that when people are talking on LinkedIn or whatever, they're just like they throw out someone else's work, secondhand knowledge, and go, hey, it's this, it's that. That's a very simple answer to a very complex question. If you want to get into complexity, we can go down the rabbit hole in the next part 2, 3, which actually contains some pretty cool stuff. So I'll give you a quick demo of what that is. We've got, I think this graph kind of says it in terms of like when. So a lot of growth is what I call nonlinear. So like you said, it sort of bumbles away for long. There's a lot of groundwork that has to be done, and then it sort of upticks. So if I was taking that time measurement from that front end, which is basically very, very slow growth or nothing, you would deem marketing ineffective. And then the same as when it's sort of diminishing returns curve kind of hits at the end of that, you would say it's ineffective. But then the middle point, you go, hey, what happened right here at this inflection point to create this massive growth? Often it's just like years of things that have happened previously. There is no flashpoint. But I think, what a lot of people go is that, hey, they did this campaign at this particular juncture. That was then the success sort of catalyst. And often that's just not the case. So that's when sort of the timeline becomes really, really important. Which is kind of why we're talking sort of about these longer term burn things versus sort of shorter term impact and the dynamic that plays out. And I just found, when you're talking about Field and Binet or something?
Yeah, Binet, yeah.
Yeah, it's just like long or short. There's no definition of time horizon here. It's like, how long is long and how short is short.
Actually, I've been talking to Dale W. Harrison on that. Good luck trying to find a definition of anything on those papers.
Yeah.
If you try and find the definition of business effect, it's not really defined.
Yeah, exactly. Like, what is a business effect? Yeah, revenue, margin. Yeah, very interesting. Acquisition. Yeah, and then there's non-linear reality is like the halo effect that politically you sort of want to take advantage of or deflect in times of underperformance, which I think is the reality that most people are under, and just how much that seesaws. I just love this. It's so true. Hey, Matt, your background is a lot of research and actually executing things like brand tracking from start to finish. A lot of the panel providers that a lot of other companies package up and resell, like brand tracking companies that you.
I used to spend a lot of time in attribution, found out it wasn't working, and then found that for the majority of brands, market research is a great way to go. Even though it's expensive, it works really well.
Yeah. You did this test recently on those panel providers as well, and you proved that one of the big ones, which are going to be nameless. So these massive panel companies that have these lots of respondents that then market research companies or brand tracking companies will contract in the back end, buy wholesale, and then use as like the respondent pool for answering questions like, hey, have you heard of this brand? Or if this brand comes to mind, what are the things you think about? Those kind of questions. So that's all packaged up from these big wholesale panel providers, and you tested one of these very, very large ones, which will be nameless, and you basically proved that how many of the respondents were actually bots or fake?
Well, it's not. It's so some of them were, when you get, I leave a lot of direct response answers, so I allow a user to sort of answer what they feel like answering, and then you look at them, and a lot of the answers are quick. They're supposed to be quick, but when they're too well structured, and they've got like 100 characters. They never do 100 characters. I'm like, that's way too many. It's too well sentence structured. I said, this is an AI response. That's a new problem that's hitting the survey space. So your research that you did in this presentation here, where you picked up the phone and talked to people, that's coming back. That's coming back with a vengeance, because there was a more respondents than I'd like were too perfect of an answer. Oh, you're on mute.
Sorry, exactly. That's why I didn't want them. I caught them sort of on the phone when they were walking to the office or something. I'm like, hey, don't be in front of a computer. They're like, I'm not in front of a computer. Because if I ask them these questions, they'll just Google it and give me some like generic response to these questions. And I found one really good litmus test of your understanding of a topic is to talk off the cuff about it accurately, because that's more directionally true than, even though there's forms of error in that response. By the way, I also followed up with a question, which is the negative, which is what isn't marketing, and then compare the two answers as well. So a lot of companies don't sort of do that when they're doing the research, because what it is can be lots of things, but what it isn't, where the sort of the lines or the barriers to that response is really, really critical. So and those questions, what is brand, very interesting from an executive comparison between marketers. Huge disparity in the responses between those two things. So I think if you're going to invest in brand, first figure out what that is, or what your CEO or CFO thinks that is as well, because that's really, really critical. Another thing I guess talked about either.
A common thing is people always, they always say, well, you should invest in proper training and everything else. But as you saw, the American Advertising Association you saw has a terrible definition of marketing, and they and I actually put the depending on who you follow in the marketing world, you're kind of following different ideologies, like the Ritson ideology, the Ehrenberg-Bass ideology, or the growth hacking ideology, the Gary V's of the world. They'll give you very different views on what a brand is.
Yes, and that's kind of, I think the perspective really flavors how you attack these things. So what I tried to keep this presentation is like pretty neutral, but if you want some more ideas about what are the strengths and weaknesses of those different ideologies, like let us know and we can respond. I think Dale Harrison does try to cut through a bit of that and sort of uses data to sort of I would say very aggressively or opinionated sort of like rebuttals, which I think is really, really good.
I've been collating some of those. They're fantastic.
Yeah, it's really interesting.
Not many people are willing to argue with their Ehrenberg-Bass.
What's really funny? I found out like Byron Sharp only worked 2 years as a marketer. Do you know that in his whole career? And it was
he does. Majority of his work is not research based. Majority of his work is either talking about research or talking with companies trying to get more research.
Yeah, exactly. But I just find it ironic that and even Ritson himself hasn't worked that long as an actual marketer. So like there's people listening, there's people who don't talk about the realities of the role because they don't actually know the realities of the role or know it secondhand. So I find, you know, this whole politics thing just doesn't get talked about at all, or frames of reference or different opinions. And that is like literally 90% of the job role that we're in. So
Well, when you were talking about the marketers and the roles they have, a friend who's worked in digital their whole life went to work at FMCG as a traditional marketing role. They couldn't believe the culture there. They couldn't believe. I'm like, wow, this is actually marketing. I think this is the first marketing role I've had where it was proper. She was very shocked. She came home. She was like, this is very different to what I was used to.
Yeah, I call it like the sort of earnings-based marketing versus optics and egos. So by default, like all companies want sort of a layer of optics and make things look good or nice or whatever. And hey, we're on this platform or we're talking about these things. That stuff is important, but it doesn't often drive the sort of bottom line effects that other people are wanting. So it's just about merging those different demands of the role together sort of eloquently, that you need to hit it sort of on all bases. So, and again, if you don't pander to egos, critical sort of egos within the workplace as well, that doesn't do you any favors and you get fired or backstabbed, like you said. So, you know, you don't survive in the role if you don't do a bit of that work as well. So it's just, I've got this really good graph on the next part 2 or 3, which sort of shows you how to sort of spend your time in those different areas if you're in an internal marketing role. So cool. I might just leave it there unless there's other questions. I need to go into the office and do some actually real work. Got a bunch of leads for a client that they need to follow up on and do some emailing, really fun stuff like that. Yeah, really glamorous sort of brand work, you know, emailing people. But yeah, that's it. Okay, cool. Thanks, Nick. Thanks, Sebastian, Nick, Nino, Biber, and Daniel. Yeah, thanks, Nino. Okay, cool. I'll keep you updated on part 2, 3. If you want to go down the rabbit hole of measurement and everything, this is probably applies mostly to senior marketers or internal staff if they really want to have those executive level conversations, and we'll go through all the different metrics and that kind of thing. So I'll just leave it there, and good to see you soon.
Thank you, everyone.